Hi, I'm Marjorie. When I was 16, I watched my stepmother toss my insulin into a fireplace, and my dad just folded his arms and watched. No yelling, no shock, just silence. I hit the floor that night, convulsing, begging, knowing they had made a choice. That wasn't even the worst part. The worst part came later, when I found out they had used my illness for donations, stolen money my mom left behind for me, cut off my insurance, and told the world I ran away. But what kind of girl runs when she can't even stand? You ever wonder how far a family will go to rewrite a story, just to erase one person from it? I've always believed silence was the loudest scream. That night, our house didn't creak or groan under the snowstorm like it usually did. It was too quiet. A strange kind of stillness that made my skin tighten, like something was watching, or waiting. The old grandfather clock in the hallway ticked louder than usual. It was almost midnight in our two-story red brick house, tucked deep in the suburbs of Cincinnati. My father, Lowell Crane, had built it before I was born. People used to say it was the kind of house you raise good kids in. They didn't know what really happened inside those walls. I sat alone in the dim kitchen, the cold tile burning through my socks. My blood sugar had been dropping for over an hour. I could feel it, the trembling, the blurry spots in my vision, the heavy fog crawling into my brain like a warning. I opened the drawer by the fridge where I always kept my insulin pen. It wasn't there. I blinked, then opened it again like it might suddenly reappear if I wished hard enough. My stomach flipped. I pulled open every drawer, ripping them halfway off their tracks. Checked the fridge, the cupboard, even the trash. Nothing. My body was starting to shake. I knew what was coming, and I also knew I didn't have long. I turned toward the living room, thinking maybe, just maybe, I had left it near the fireplace after dinner. That's when I saw her. Odessa. She was leaning against the doorframe like she'd been waiting for me to notice her. Her arms were crossed, her expression relaxed, like she was watching a dog paw at a locked door. Then, I saw it. In her hand, my insulin pen. She held it loosely, dangling from her fingers like a cigarette. "Looking for this?" she said, smiling like it was a joke. My heart stopped. Behind her, barely visible in the hallway shadows, stood my father, Lowell. His arms were folded across his chest, not a word, not a blink, just watching. I took one shaky step forward. "Please," I whispered, my throat already closing up. Odessa's smile widened. She turned to the fireplace, where embers glowed faintly under the iron grate. Without a word, she tossed the insulin pen in, like it meant nothing. I screamed. Not words. Just a sound that came from somewhere deep and primal. I stumbled toward the flames, collapsing halfway across the rug. Crawled the rest of the way, tried to reach inside. The heat licked my skin. The plastic casing of the pen cracked and hissed as it melted. I looked up, begging for anything. Lowell didn't move, not an inch. Odessa turned away, brushing imaginary lint off her sweater. They were letting me die. No, they wanted me dead. The realization hit me harder than the low blood sugar ever could. My body gave out before my voice did. I collapsed beside the hearth, mouth open, eyes watering, everything around me spinning. My vision narrowed into a tunnel, then flickered at the edges like a failing light bulb. I heard footsteps, but not toward me, away. Then the light in the room clicked off. Darkness, silence, and a pain in my chest that was bigger than just glucose starvation. They hated me so much. They couldn't even pretend anymore. I was 16. I wasn't loud, I wasn't rebellious, I followed rules. I took care of my condition on my own. I didn't ask for much, but I wasn't hers. I was the last piece of a woman Odessa couldn't stand to be compared to. And my father, he didn't want a reminder of what he'd failed to protect. I felt it. The moment they gave up on pretending, on hiding. I wasn't their daughter. I was a problem, a liability, a story they didn't want to keep writing. My limbs stopped responding, my thoughts blurred together. Somewhere far back in my mind, I heard her voice, my real mother's voice, soft, just above a whisper. "If they ever hurt you, you fight to live." I wanted to. God, I wanted to. I just couldn't move. But then, Something. A knock. At first, I thought I imagined it, a hallucination, a final mercy from a failing brain. Then again, louder. Knock. Someone was at the front door. I couldn't see them, couldn't call out, couldn't do anything but hope the wind would blow it open. And hope was all I had left. The next sound I remember was the rustling of plastic grocery bags and the click of a heater turning on. I didn't open my eyes right away. My head pounded like it had been split in two, and my limbs felt as if someone had drained every last drop of strength from them. The soft crackle of firewood brought me back just enough to feel the scratch of flannel against my cheek. I was wrapped in blankets, thick ones that smelled like lavender and old cedar. I wasn't dead. That realization didn't bring relief, it brought confusion, then embarrassment. I didn't know where I was or who had found me, but I was sure I hadn't saved myself. And I hated that part most of all. "You're awake." The voice was gentle, raspy, and unmistakably familiar. I turned my head slightly, blinking up at a woman with silver hair pulled back into a clip. She wore a bulky cardigan over a nightgown and held a mug in one hand like it was her fourth that morning. "Mrs. Moss?" She smiled, sitting on the armrest of the couch I was laid across. "Henrietta's too much of a mouthful, huh? You can call me Henny, like the chicken." A weak laugh escaped me before a cough took its place. My throat burned. Henny reached for a spoon and held it out toward me. "Soup first, then insulin. I've got a few backup pens in the fridge. Yours is gone, sweetheart. They burned it." I didn't ask how she knew. I just nodded, tears pricking the corners of my eyes as the warmth from the first sip spread through my chest like mercy. "You've got a pulse," she said after a pause. "That's a miracle." The next few hours blurred together. Henny checked my sugar levels with a kit older than I was, gave me a clean pair of socks, and tucked a hot water bottle under my blanket. She didn't ask any questions, not at first. It wasn't until late morning, sunlight fighting through the frost-laced windows, that she brought in the phone and sat beside me again. "I went ahead and tried to refill your prescription," she said, setting the receiver on the table, "just so you'd have something lined up today." I looked at her, suddenly more alert. "Thank you." "Well," she continued slowly, "the pharmacy couldn't find an active policy. They said your insurance was terminated." My stomach dropped. "That can't be right," I whispered. "It's what they said. They gave me the number for your provider." "We can call them now." Henny didn't pressure me, but the line was already ringing. She handed me the receiver when the hold music stopped. "Hi," I rasped. "This is Marjorie Vale. I'm trying to confirm my coverage." The woman on the other end sounded nice enough, polished, professional, detached. She took my birth date, my address, and then paused. "I'm sorry, Ms. Vale. Your policy was terminated 3 months ago. It was formally closed by a Lowell Crane, listed as your primary guardian." I didn't respond. "Ms. Vale?" "Thank you," I managed. "I need to go." I hung up. The quiet between Henny and me wasn't uncomfortable, but it was heavy. She didn't look surprised. I guess she'd known for a while what kind of people lived behind our red brick walls. "He cut you off," she said gently. "He cut his own daughter off." That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared up at the ceiling in Henny's guest room, where she'd made space for me without hesitation, and replayed conversations I'd brushed off years ago. "Your mom was always overly cautious," Lowell had once said, flipping through papers. "She planned for disasters that never happened." "She just wanted me to have what I needed," I'd replied. "Right, and she trusted the wrong people with it." That last part hadn't made sense then. But now, in the silence of someone else's home, it clicked. I waited until past midnight. Odessa had her Pilates class on Thursdays. She'd always come home late, bragging about how many women were jealous of how toned she still was. I knew the routine. Slipping into the house was easier than it should have been. The garage was unlocked. I didn't head upstairs. I didn't want to see them, didn't want to hear whatever lie they might have concocted to explain away what they'd done to me. I went straight to the cabinet near the water heater where Lowell kept all the important documents in a rusted green filing box. At the very back, I found it. An envelope addressed to me in my mother's handwriting, already opened. Inside was a balance slip, $0. Next to it, stapled, was a form confirming the account closure, 2 months prior. My hand trembled as I reached further into the box and pulled out another envelope. A car title, not in my name, not in Lowell's either. It was for a silver sedan registered to Odessa's teenage son, paid in full. I stood there for a long moment, letting it sink in. He took what little security my mother had left me and used it to buy a car for someone who barely remembered my name. I closed the box and left it as I found it. They wouldn't even know I'd been there. Back at Henny's, I didn't say a word. I sat on the edge of her couch, holding that balance slip, thinking about how much it had cost them to silence me. Not emotionally, not morally, just financially. This wasn't just neglect, I whispered to myself. It was extraction, and I was the resource. I didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because it hurt too much to waste on tears. The next morning, the snow had stopped. The world outside looked cleaner than it should have. I stared out the front window for a long time, watching kids drag sleds across the street, chasing the kind of joy I hadn't felt in years. Henny walked in with 2 mugs of coffee and set one down beside me. "What do you want to do now, honey?" I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on the street. "I'm going to take everything they tried to steal from me," I said, "and I'll start with the truth." The words still echoed in my chest the next morning, my own voice from the night before, firm and certain, declaring war in a whisper. I didn't tell Henny much else after that. She didn't press. She just gave me space, like she knew that sometimes the silence was where a plan took root. By the time I returned to school, my name had already made its rounds in the worst possible way. I stepped through the double doors of Cincinnati Public High under a gray sky, thinking maybe the storm had stayed outside. It hadn't. People stared. But not the kind that meant, "We're glad you're okay." It was more like I was something to be dissected, judged. Quiet ridicule buzzed in the air like a wasp you couldn't see but kept feeling near your skin. "Thought she transferred," someone muttered in the hallway. Another voice, louder, deliberately careless, added, "Nah, she's just trying to guilt-trip people again. Sick girl act." I kept walking. At my locker, a note had been taped across the vented door. "Drama Queen Clinic, 3rd floor." In Sharpie, they'd drawn a stick figure with a syringe in its neck. I didn't tear it down. I let it stay, like a flag that warned them I wasn't hiding anymore. Later, during homeroom, the worst of it came from someone who should have known better. "Feeling better today?" Mr. Rowlands asked with an exaggerated smile. "Or just didn't feel like faking it this time?" A few students snorted. I didn't. I stared back at him until the smirk on his face cracked just slightly. That afternoon, after the last bell rang, I slipped into the faculty lounge hallway, where teachers usually congregated for coffee and whispered gossip. I wasn't stalking anyone. I just had nowhere else to go for 5 minutes before my ride. That's when I heard her voice. "Odessa." She was laughing, her tone bright and concerned, the kind that sounded like she was saying something sweet while planting a dagger in someone's back. "You know how some girls are," she said, her voice full of feigned sympathy. "They'll do anything for attention, even pass out in the middle of the floor just to be the center of the room." Someone chuckled in response. I couldn't tell who. Maybe another parent. Maybe a teacher. "She's always had that flair for drama," Odessa continued. "Poor thing just doesn't know where the line is." I left without being seen. But something inside me had changed in that hallway. There was no going back to hoping they'd stop. They weren't going to stop. They'd rewrite my entire identity if I let them. Back at Henny's that evening, I sat on the floor with an old photo album from my mother, pages that still smelled like lemon-scented linen. I turned through images of birthdays, treehouses, cheap costumes, and snow angels. That night, a memory came flooding back. It wasn't recent, but it felt relevant now. It was about a month before Odessa burned my insulin. She'd walked into church crying, said her son, Jason, had suffered a terrible diabetic episode at school. Ambulance, ER, dizziness, almost died. The whole congregation reacted like she'd just lived through war. Within a week, the church had set up a GoFundMe, $12,000. Help the Crane family cover medical costs. Back then, I didn't think much of it. But now, I remembered something odd from that day. A box of supplies on the dining table. Open. Too open. I walked by it and saw a small pile of insulin pens. They weren't labeled, except one. The label had been peeled off. Only a sliver remained. And it was my prescription number. I hadn't thought about it then. I was still too sick, too shaken, too busy trying not to be in the way. But now it made sense. They hadn't just taken from me. They'd used me. Literally. The next night, while Henny was in the back room folding laundry, I went upstairs and found the old phone I kept in a drawer. Odessa had never bothered to shut off the house's Wi-Fi password. I guess she didn't think I'd come back. But I did. I waited until Friday. She always left the house around 5 o'clock for her weekly appointment, claimed it was Pilates, but I knew it was a wine bar on the edge of downtown where she liked to network. The garage code hadn't changed. I slipped inside quietly, bypassed the kitchen, and went straight to her walk-in closet. Odessa always prided herself on organization. She used to say, "You can tell a woman's power by how she stores her pills and heels." In the back corner of the closet, beneath a false bottom drawer, I found the stash. Boxes labeled under Jason's name. But they weren't his. They were mine. The refill numbers, the brand, the date. My date. She'd transferred my supplies. She'd built her son's diagnosis on top of mine. And worst of all, she'd collected donations for it. I took photos, every label, every bottle, every slip that bore a transfer signature, one forged in a handwriting that wasn't mine. When I returned to Henny's that evening, I didn't say anything. I went into the small office, pulled out the printer, and loaded the photos onto the screen. They printed slowly, one at a time, each more damning than the last. I pinned them to a corkboard above the desk. The evidence of a theft that was deeper than money, deeper than insulin. This was identity theft. And it was deliberate. I sat back in the chair, the desk lamp casting a dull yellow glow across the room. Outside, snow flurried again, coating the world in silence. I stared at the board for a long time, my fingers wrapped around a pencil I wasn't even using. "One day," I whispered, "she'll explain this to someone with a badge." But first, I needed to survive long enough to collect every piece of their rot. The glow from the desk lamp faded behind me as I stepped into the hallway, the printed photos still warm in my hand. I didn't go to bed right away. I sat on the staircase just outside Henny's laundry room, the one she always kept too warm. I could hear her folding towels in a rhythm that matched the old wall clock ticking above my head. Outside, snow had returned like it hadn't gotten the memo that spring was supposed to be arriving soon. It fell softly against the porch window, making everything feel quieter than it already was. But I didn't feel quiet. Inside, something buzzed, low and steady, like a voltage I hadn't accessed before. By morning, I had decided, if they wanted to strip me of everything, my health, my name, my story, I would start by building something that belonged only to me. It began simply. Oatmeal. Hot, slightly overcooked, with a splash of almond milk because Henny didn't keep regular milk in the house anymore. She slid a bowl in front of me, then placed a napkin and fork down next to it, as if I was about to eat cake. "You've got a drawer now," she said, pointing to the sideboard under the hallway mirror. "Middle one. I cleared it out for you. It's yours, for whatever you want." I swallowed the bite I'd just taken and nodded. "Thanks." She smiled but didn't hover. That was one of the things I liked most about her. Henny didn't try to mother me into safety. She gave me space to do it myself. A few days later, I went in for my first official doctor's appointment since the incident. Henny came with me, not because I asked, but because she said someone should be there who believed me. I expected the worst. Cold forms, colder stares. The standard, "Let's get you on the scale," followed by indifferent scribbles and the kind of clinical detachment that always made me feel like a chart instead of a person. But that doctor, Dr. Singh, didn't do that. He looked at me when he spoke. He asked questions, then waited for my answers like they mattered. When I told him about the fainting, the fire, the insulin, the anxiety that now came with me even walking into a room with fluorescent lights, he didn't rush past it. He said gently, "That's trauma, not weakness." He gave me a prescription for counseling, free, through a state-funded school partnership program. "It's not charity," he added when he handed me the information sheet. "It's what you've already earned by surviving this long." I folded the paper carefully and put it in the inner pocket of my backpack. Later that same week, I met with the school counselor, who had the usual cat-themed coffee mug and a cluttered desk full of sticky notes. She asked me questions about how I was sleeping, how my grades had dropped, how I was adjusting. Then she paused, looked at her screen, and frowned. "Huh," she said. "Why didn't you go to your scholarship interview?" I blinked. "What interview?" "For the Women in STEM Future Scholars Program. You were nominated and accepted for a finalist interview back in February. According to this, it was confirmed. You never showed." My skin went cold. She tapped the keyboard again and pulled up a scanned PDF. "See? It says right here, received by guardian signature, Lowell Crane." I stared at the screen. He signed it. He'd opened the letter, seen my name, read every word that offered me a chance out, and he signed it as if he were me, then tossed it somewhere I'd never find. My ears rang. I don't remember leaving her office, just that at some point I was standing in the back hallway near the vending machines, my hands shaking hard enough to drop the bottle of water I'd just bought. Henny was waiting outside in the car when I got to the curb. She always parked a little too far from the front entrance, said it helped her stay out of traffic, but still stay close. I climbed in, closed the door, and just handed her the printed letter. She didn't say anything right away, just stared at the page like it had spat in her face. "He knew," I whispered. "He saw what I was given, and he took it." Henny exhaled slowly, then set the paper on her lap. "Then we show them," she said. "We show them what happens when you try to erase someone and fail." Back at her house, I couldn't sit still. I pulled out my laptop and opened every scholarship reapplication page I could find. Some deadlines had passed, but others were still open. I scanned forms, highlighted paragraphs, saved essays I'd half-written months ago, but never finished. I wrote until my eyes blurred, until the cursor became a metronome counting down a future they couldn't keep from me anymore. Later that night, the house was still. The kind of still that feels safe, not because everything is perfect, but because nothing is pretending. I sat at the kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a mug of chamomile, and watched the snow melt off the edges of the porch roof. "They buried me," I said aloud, not to anyone in particular. "But I'm not dead, and I'm done staying quiet." The line went dead as Odessa hung up, but her voice lingered like the aftertaste of something spoiled. That call wasn't a confrontation. It was a warning dressed up in cowardice, and it came too late. She didn't know that by the time she picked up that phone, I'd already made the next move. It had started weeks earlier, after I'd begun assembling everything into neat little folders, paper and digital, labeling each one by category: insurance fraud, medical neglect, property theft. I even had a tab for psychological manipulation, though I wasn't sure which form would accept something that vile. Every Sunday, I walked to the library near Henny's house with a backpack slung low and a sense of mission I hadn't felt since my mother was alive. The library was quiet, almost forgotten, but it had working scanners, a copier, and no questions. I became a regular fixture in the back corner near the window, scanning page after page of what Lowell and Odessa left behind like breadcrumbs for a daughter they thought too weak to trace. One day, tucked inside a drawer I hadn't opened in years, beneath old birthday cards and dust-covered USB sticks, I found a flash drive that didn't belong to me. I only remembered it because the casing had a chip in the corner, something I'd seen Lowell toss into his desk years ago and call junk. Turns out, that junk held gold. I brought it to a local computer repair shop Henny trusted. The guy running it was in his late 30s, looked like he hadn't slept since the Obama administration, but he was sharp. Wore gloves while he worked and referred to every file like it was a surgical instrument. 3 days later, he called, "Miss Vale, you'll want to see this." I met him in the shop on a rainy Tuesday, the kind of day that made Ohio feel like one long sigh. He didn't say anything when I arrived, just clicked a few keys, opened a video player, and turned the monitor toward me. The footage was grainy, low frame rate, but it was clear. There was Odessa, standing by the fireplace in our old living room, laughing. In her hand, my insulin pen. "You think she really needs this?" she said to someone off camera, though she was smirking at them like it was all a game. "I swear, that girl would fake her own death if it meant someone finally paid attention." And then, she threw it into the fire. The flame caught immediately. Plastic bubbled. Smoke curled into the air. She smiled and walked away. In the background, just behind the frame, stood Lowell, arms crossed, unmoving, watching. And I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't even blink. I asked the technician to copy the file onto a secure drive, and I paid in cash. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at Henny's kitchen table, watching the video over and over, like it might somehow end differently the 10th time. It never did. I thought about calling someone, CPS maybe, the police, a lawyer. But then I thought better. Odessa had spent years crafting a reputation. Fundraisers, women's brunches, volunteering at the school library, always with a smile just wide enough to keep people guessing whether it was real or rehearsed. If I wanted to take her down, it couldn't be loud at first. It had to be surgical. So I sent the video anonymously. A flash drive in a plain manila envelope delivered directly to the front door of the house she used to pretend was ours. No return address. Just a note in black ink. "If you think this will stay buried, you've underestimated the fire you started." I mailed it on a Thursday. By Saturday, she called. That call, the one that ended with, "You don't know what you're doing," wasn't about fear. It was about losing control. And the very next day, I found myself standing in front of a small brick building I hadn't seen in years, my old middle school. Miss Lambert's classroom hadn't changed much, still smelled like expo markers and worn-down pencil erasers. She looked older, but her eyes hadn't aged a day. They still held that spark I remembered, the one that made you think maybe, just maybe, she knew what you were carrying. "I remember everything," she said after I introduced myself, her voice steady. She gestured for me to sit, and I did, gripping the strap of my bag like it could keep me upright. "I reported it," she continued, "back in 8th grade, when you came in with bruises on your arms and skipped insulin checks. I filed the report with the district social worker." "What happened?" I asked. "Your father came in the next day," she said. "Had a meeting with the principal behind closed doors. The file got flagged as inappropriate involvement. A warning showed up in my file. I was told to back off or risk transfer." She didn't sound bitter, just tired. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice thinner than I wanted it to be. She reached across the desk and put her hand over mine. "Don't apologize, just tell the truth now. Whatever you're building, I'll give you a statement. I'll sign whatever I need to." I thanked her, and I meant it. That night, I printed her statement, folded it, and added it to the ever-growing evidence file that now lived in a fireproof box beneath Henny's couch. Then I sat down and wrote another note. To Odessa, not an apology, not a threat, a mirror. "You created this story. You're just mad I stopped letting you write the ending." That was all I said. This time, I didn't mail it. I tucked it inside a second manila envelope, along with a copy of Miss Lambert's statement, the video stills, and a full transcript. Then I left it on the hood of her car while she was inside the nail salon on Main Street, the one where she gossiped loud enough for everyone to hear. I didn't run. I walked away slowly. Later that night, the landline rang. The only people who called it anymore were insurance companies and people who wanted something. Henny looked at the screen. "Unknown caller," she said, glancing my way. "Let it ring," I said. But she handed it to me anyway. I answered. Silence. Then, "You don't know what you're doing." I didn't hesitate. "No," I said. "But you do, and now I do too." The flame caught fast. The edge of the paper curled upward like it had been waiting for fire. I didn't flinch as Odessa's handwriting blackened and folded in on itself, disappearing into ash inside Henny's ceramic sink. She watched me from the other side of the kitchen, one hand wrapped around her mug, not saying a word. She didn't have to. That letter didn't scare me. It confirmed something I'd suspected for years. Odessa had never seen me as anything more than a problem she hadn't quite solved. And now that her solution was unraveling in front of everyone, she was flailing, loudly. It was a Sunday afternoon when the next blow landed, this time not on my body or through a lawyer's envelope, but in public, under a chandelier in a church banquet hall where I'd been invited only because someone assumed I was still part of the family. The invitation had been vague, tucked in a card with generic handwriting, no return address. But it mentioned my grandparents' wedding anniversary, and for a brief second I let my guard down. Maybe someone in that family still remembered me as more than a headline. Henny offered to come with me, but I said no. I needed to stand alone. I dressed simply. Navy sweater, black slacks, something neutral, nothing flashy, just enough to say, I exist. The church was packed. Cars lined up in the lot, music pouring through the open windows. I walked up the front steps slowly, taking in the laughter, the familiar faces I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. Some glanced in my direction and then quickly looked away. At the door, a woman with a clipboard stood checking names. Hi, I said. Marjorie Vale. She squinted at the list, flipping a few pages. I'm sorry, she said, her voice tight. Odessa said your name isn't on the list. My breath caught for half a second, but I didn't let it show. I see, I said calmly. Could you let her know I came? The woman gave a hesitant nod. Sure. I turned around and walked back down those stairs with more grace than I thought I had in me. Through the window, I saw Odessa standing near the center of the banquet room. She wore a pale pink blazer, her hair pinned back like she'd stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. She was holding a microphone. Family, she said to the room, beaming, means everything. I didn't hear the rest. I didn't need to. That night, back at Henny's, I brewed tea with shaking hands. Henny came into the kitchen just as I was setting the kettle down a little too hard on the counter. You're not going back there, she said. Not after this. I nodded, swallowing the heat rising in my chest. The next day brought something more theatrical. Odessa appeared on local TV, of all places, during a segment called Mothers Who Lost Touch. I only knew because a girl from high school tagged me in a clip on social media with a comment, "Is this about you?" I watched the interview on Henny's tablet. Odessa sat perfectly posed, hands folded in her lap, a single tissue delicately held near her cheek. She ran away, she told the host, her voice trembling. I just want my baby girl back. I pray for her every night. I don't know why she thinks I ever wanted to hurt her. All I did was love her. My jaw clenched. The host nodded sympathetically. Sometimes kids don't understand we're doing our best. She's broken, Odessa said. But I still believe she can come home. I stood up, walked straight to the file drawer in Henny's den, and pulled out the flash drive. I didn't feel rage. I felt ready. That night, I published my post. She didn't lose me. She threw me out. That was the title. Below it, I wrote, She says I ran away. The truth is, I was burned out of my home. My stepmother threw my insulin into the fire and watched me collapse on our living room floor. My father stood beside her. They told people I was dramatic. I have the footage. I have the records. I have my name. I attached screenshots, copies of the letter she intercepted, a still frame from the video. It took less than 24 hours. The post spread like gasoline on pavement. By morning, it had thousands of shares. By noon, people from church were messaging me. Some apologized, some denied, some begged me to take it down. I didn't. The local paper emailed asking for an interview. I declined. I wanted my words to speak for themselves. 2 days later, a letter arrived. No stamp, hand-delivered. Henny found it tucked behind the screen door while watering her plants. It was a single sheet of cream-colored stationery, the kind Odessa always used for thank you cards and pretentious birthday invites. Inside, one line. You'll regret this. I read it twice, then calmly walked to the kitchen. I lit a match, held it to the corner, and dropped the paper into the sink. Henny didn't ask. We both watched it burn, the flames swallowing each loop of Odessa's script, every ounce of her false authority, until it was nothing but ash. I had stopped counting the lies. They blurred together, soft betrayals dressed in polite smiles and Sunday dresses. But the letter burned in the sink had done something more than just expose Odessa's desperation. It cleared the smoke from my view. I could finally see the battlefield for what it was. The blog post hadn't just gone viral, it had cracked something open. People started writing to me, some strangers, some names I hadn't heard in over a decade. But one message, buried among hundreds of others, stopped me cold. Subject line: "You don't know me, but I knew your father." The sender's name was Lenora Pritchard. The email was short, blunt. She said she used to be engaged to Lowell. Briefly, that she left him for reasons she didn't want to type, but she still had copies of documents he'd left behind in her home office. One of them, she said, was a copy of his revised will. "I thought you might want to see what was missing," she wrote. She attached a scanned PDF. I stared at the file name for a while before clicking. Crane, Estate Rev Final. I knew even before the page loaded. But seeing it in writing, that was a different beast. Beneficiaries: Odessa Crane, spouse, Jason Meyer, stepson. Marjorie Vale, removed as of November 14, 2016. Notes: emotional instability, risk to reputation, non-cooperative behavior. My name was a footnote in my own legacy, not even a child, a liability. The version of me he had built in his head was nothing like the one who sat reading that document on a couch that didn't belong to him. He had erased me long before I'd ever tried to fight back. I forwarded the email to Caleb, my attorney. He was a friend of Henny's, older, deliberate in his speech, and sharp as a scalpel. His response came within an hour. "That's what we call willful exclusion, likely motivated by defamation. It won't bring you the estate, but it sure builds your case." I didn't want his money. I wanted the truth recorded somewhere it couldn't be shredded. That same week, a reporter from the Cincinnati Journal reached out. She'd seen my post and wanted to put a face to the headline. I didn't answer at first, but then I remembered Odessa's performance on television. The trembling hand, the staged tear, the lie dressed up as longing. I called the reporter back. The interview happened on a rainy Friday, in a small conference room at a local community center where they let her film quietly. I didn't wear makeup, didn't rehearse, just sat across from her and answered each question plainly. "What made you speak out now?" she asked. "They told me I was the problem," I said. I believed them for a long time, then I stopped, and now I think people deserve to know what silence protects. She leaned forward. "Do you think they ever loved you?" I paused. I think they loved their story more than me, and I stopped fitting into it. The article ran online 3 days later. Title: She watched her daughter almost die, then tried to silence her. It included stills from the video, quotes from Miss Lambert, a statement from the medical technician who remembered Odessa's refusal to call 911. "She said it wasn't serious," he told the reporter, "but the girl came in unconscious. We almost lost her." They reached out to Odessa for comment. She slammed the door in their face. Caleb called that afternoon. "You might be getting something in the mail soon. Just a heads up." It arrived the next day. A thick manila envelope, no return address, but I didn't need one. Inside, a cease and desist letter. Standard legal language. Claims of ongoing defamation, emotional distress, libelous implication. At the bottom, her signature, loopy, overconfident, a flourish meant to intimidate. Caleb laughed when I showed him. "Let them try," he said. "Truth is your best defense, and you've got more than enough." I didn't respond to the letter. I didn't need to. The following week, the news segment aired. Prime time, 10 minutes on regional television that featured my face, my voice, and the story they never thought would be told without their permission. The final scene showed Odessa storming into her house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. 2 nights later, I got a voicemail. Blocked number. But the voice, unmistakable. Lowell. He didn't sound angry. He sounded surgical, precise. "If you think this ends with a blog," he said, "you don't know me." I played the message twice, then I deleted it. He was wrong. I did know him. I knew the man who stood by as I begged for help. who rewrote his will because I embarrassed him, who watched a woman burn my insulin and didn't blink. But what he didn't know, what he'd never understand, was that the girl he erased had stopped needing his acknowledgement a long time ago. I didn't reply. I didn't have to, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to survive my father. I was ready to bury him, not with rage, not with violence, but with truth. Some fathers bury secrets. Mine buried me, and now I was done digging alone. 3 weeks had passed since my father's voice had slithered through the phone line, delivering that chilling promise like he was still the one holding the pen in my story. He wasn't. Not anymore. It was late April when the Briarstone Elder Living Facility returned the application I knew Odessa had helped him complete. Their building was wrapped in glass and surrounded by manicured hedges. Only the right kind of people got to age there. It wasn't just luxury. It was image, status, legacy. They didn't expect someone to dig through public records. They didn't expect that someone to attach those records, medical neglect, documented abuse, the confirmed video, and mail them, certified, to the admissions board. And Briarstone? They didn't want a scandal. Lowell and Odessa arrived with matching tension in their spines, dressed like a corporate power couple pretending to be a frail old man and his loyal wife. I wasn't there in person, but I heard about it through someone who was. The receptionist's tone had been even, neutral. "I'm sorry, Mr. Crane. Due to your documented history and the nature of ongoing legal concerns, we cannot proceed with your placement. We have to consider the safety and well-being of all residents." Lowell's temper had always been quiet until it wasn't. According to the witness, he didn't scream. He clenched his jaw, stared at the woman for a full 5 seconds, and muttered, "You're making a mistake." Odessa tried to salvage it with charm. "This must be a misunderstanding." The receptionist didn't blink. "You're welcome to reapply in 6 months." Odessa didn't speak on the drive home, I was told. For once, I had no interest in revenge. But justice? That was different. A week later, I stood behind a wooden podium at the state medical conference. A sea of faces sat before me. Doctors, nurses, public health officials, and survivors who knew what it meant to go unheard. I was receiving the Community Health Leadership Award, something I hadn't known existed until I was nominated by Dr. Singh and seconded by Henny. When I walked onto that stage, the light wasn't blinding. It was warm. I didn't prepare a speech. I didn't want one, so I spoke the only way I knew how. When I was 16, I began. I collapsed on the floor of my living room from diabetic shock. My stepmother had thrown away my insulin. My father watched. No one called for help. I lived, but just barely. The room held its breath. I spent years trying to figure out if that made me broken, if surviving something like that meant I was supposed to stay small, silent, grateful I was alive and nothing more. I looked toward the back of the room. Henny stood, her eyes glassy. "But what I learned," I continued, "was that family isn't who shares your name. It's who refuses to let you fall. It's the doctor who listened, the neighbor who stepped in, the stranger who believed you when no one else did." I didn't mention Lowell. I didn't say Odessa's name. They no longer earned the honor of being part of my story. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, I walked out of the conference center with Henny on one side and Caleb on the other. I'd never felt lighter, but the quiet didn't last long. As we reached the car, Odessa appeared from the sidewalk like a shadow peeling off a wall. She looked wrong, like a wax figure melting in heat it didn't expect. "I didn't know," she said before I could even speak. Henny's arm tensed. "I didn't know it was that bad, Marjorie." I stepped forward, not aggressively, not with rage, just with clarity. "You saw," I said. "You chose not to see." Her mouth opened, but I didn't wait for the next line. We got in the car and drove away. 2 days later, Caleb called with another update. Lowell had suffered a mild stroke, not fatal, but enough to force retirement. Enough to keep him from traveling, enough to take away the last bit of control he thought he had. I listened, then said nothing. This was never about revenge, I told Caleb, just clarity. That same week, the construction on my clinic's new wing finished. We named it the Vale Center for Resilient Care, funded almost entirely by donations from women who had survived medical abuse, neglect, or systems that refused to hear them. I walked through the glass doors alone one morning before opening hours. The floor still smelled like fresh paint. The air buzzed with anticipation. In the waiting room, a plaque hung on the wall, in memory of Henrietta Moss, who taught us what it means to step in. I ran my fingers across the lettering, the brass cool under my hand. This wasn't just a clinic. It was the house I never had. It was mine. I stood by the front door, turned the lock, and whispered to no one in particular, "This is where the cycle ends. This is where I begin." It had been nearly a month since the conference, long enough for the applause to fade, for the headlines to cool. But something inside me hadn't settled yet. Not in a bad way, not the old kind of restlessness. This was different. It was the kind of stillness that came not from exhaustion, but from arrival. That morning, I stepped into the clinic alone, before the others arrived. The air still held a hint of fresh paint and new vinyl. The sun cut through the blinds, drawing long lines across the floor like silent applause. I carried a small package under my arm, carefully sealed, wrapped in brown paper, addressed with clean handwriting. To Mr. Lowell Crane. There was no return address. I didn't want one. Inside the envelope was a final gift, not of forgiveness, not of vengeance, just truth. I had printed a copy of my ER admission report, the one from the night I almost died. I added the still image from the video showing Odessa tossing the insulin into the fireplace. Folded beside it was a photo of me at age 7, sitting in my mother's lap on the front porch, the sun catching our hair in matching curls. And finally, a handwritten card. "This is the last thing you'll ever receive from me. Goodbye." I mailed it myself from the post office downtown, not because I expected a response, but because he needed to know that I got the last word. Not in anger, but in clarity. That afternoon, I drove out to the cemetery. The air was crisp, but not cold. Spring had finally arrived. Henny's grave was easy to find now. They'd added a small bench nearby, donated by one of her former patients. I sat down with a single sunflower in hand, a small thank you card tucked into the petals. I didn't bring music. I didn't pray aloud. I just sat with her. "You saved me before anyone knew I needed saving," I said, my voice soft but steady. "I built something, Henny. It's real. And it's safe." I placed the flower on her headstone and left the card tucked behind it. On the front, my first patient at the new clinic had scribbled in crooked letters, "Thank you, Miss M." Back in the car, I didn't feel empty like I used to after these visits. There were no tears this time. Just a quiet sense of alignment, like something inside had finally clicked into place. 2 evenings later, I heard about Odessa. A colleague had tagged me in a clip from a local news interview, a follow-up segment about women in medicine, featuring me among other honorees. It aired during prime time. I didn't watch it live, but Odessa did. According to someone who lived in her building, she watched the entire segment alone, in the dark, wine glass untouched on the table. She didn't cry, didn't throw anything, just stared. And what made it worse, for her, was that I never said her name, not once. That was the real punishment. She wasn't famous. She wasn't infamous. She was invisible, erased. I didn't do it to hurt her. I did it because she no longer held relevance. Odessa's absence in my story had become more powerful than any accusation. The next day, I arrived early at the clinic with Jasper. He walked beside me in silence, holding 2 cups of coffee and a bag of bagels from the place down the street. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't need to. The staff had gathered in the front lobby, nurses, therapists, admin volunteers. They clapped as I cut the ribbon to the new wing. The plaque at the entrance read, "The Vale Foundation, for Children Without Voices." Beneath that, in smaller letters, "In memory of Henny Moss, who believed when others refused." I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The hall smelled of lavender and clean linens, the kind of scent meant to calm. Art from the kids lined the walls already, stick figures and hearts, suns with smiling faces. In room 3, a boy named Luis sat with his counselor. He'd been misdiagnosed for months. No one had believed his symptoms were real, until now. In room 6, a teenage girl filled out a medical history form on her own for the first time. Her mom sat beside her, arms crossed, but the girl looked proud, in charge. This place wasn't just bricks and furniture. It was the body I had rebuilt after they tried to destroy mine. That evening, I went home and sat by my bedroom window, looking out over the quiet street. The lamp cast a pool of light on my old leather journal. I hadn't touched it in a while. I opened to a blank page and began to write. They didn't destroy me, but they branded me. And that scar is mine now, not theirs. I carry it like a flag, not a wound, a reminder of what I survived and why I refuse to live quietly. I closed the journal, set it on my nightstand, and turned off the light. For the first time in years, I didn't stay awake waiting for the past to crawl back in through the cracks. I slept. And the silence wasn't terrifying, it was earned. Not every wound bleeds on the outside, and not every family deserves to keep your silence. If this story made you reflect on your own definition of family, you're not alone. Sometimes the hardest part isn't surviving the betrayal. It's standing up and telling the truth anyway. What would you have done if this were your daughter or your story? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true stories like this one. Your voice matters here.